we're going to talk about language and the beauty that language brings into culture and negotiations, and the fact that we really need to be aware of what those are, and make an effort to understand other people's language, because culture and language are very closely tied together. So I wanted to start by showing you a YouTube. It's a TEDx Teens about a guy who very young developed an ability and a practice of learning languages, and what that did to him when it became public knowledge that he knew so many languages. And I wanted to show this to you because I believe that if you speak more than one language, you have probably experienced some part of this. So, okay, so this is going to be computer sound, and I hope it works for us.
So about 2 years ago, I was featured in Adventures of a Teenage Polyglot, which featured my passion for learning foreign languages, this peculiar hobby that I had. And at first I thought it was great. I loved the fact that language learning was getting more attention. I loved the fact that what had always seemed like an isolating hobby was suddenly putting me into contact with people all around the world. Yet as I spent more time in the media spotlight, the focus of my story began to shift. So whereas I'd always been interested in talking about the why and the how, why I was learning foreign languages, how I did it, instead it turned into a bit of a circus in which media shows wanted to sensationalize my story. So it would go a little something like this. Hello, I'm here today with 17-year-old Timothy Donor, who is fluent in 20 languages. Oh, I'm sorry, he actually can insult you in 25 languages and is fluent in another 10. Tim, how about you tell our audience good morning and thank you for watching in Muslim? Arabic. أهلا بكم يا مشاهدون وشكرا جزيلا للمشاهدة. Great, Tim. Now, can we get you to introduce yourself and say, I'm fluent in 23 languages in German? It's not really true, but no, just tell the audience.
Hallo, ich bin Tim Donner, ich bin 17 Jahre alt und ich kann ungefähr 23 Sprachen fließend sprechen.
Perfect. Now, how about a tongue twister in Chinese? Well, we could talk about Chinese. You know, a lot more Americans are learning Chinese these days, and I think there's a lot of value in that. No, just give us a tongue twister.
吃葡萄不吐葡萄皮儿，不吃葡萄倒吐葡萄皮儿。
This guy. Tim, how about another tongue twister in Chinese? I would prefer not to, but, you know, we could talk about China. You know, there's a lot that you can gain by learning a language. Oh, Tim, I'm sorry, that's all the time we have. Now, why don't you tell our audience goodbye in Turkish, and we'll be over here. You know, we haven't talked about anything substantive, but Turkish, please.
Haydi bakalım. Tamam. Güle güle ve çok teşekkür ederim.
How about that kid, right? Wonder if he gets any girls. Now, stay with us, because up next, a skateboarding bulldog in a bathing suit. So, as funny as that was, it highlighted two pretty major problems in the way my story was covered. On a personal level, I felt that language learning was now becoming like a bit of a task, almost. It felt like something that was suddenly had to be rigidly organized, something that had to be compartmentalized, rationalized, expressed in a concrete number. I speak X languages, I know Y languages, as opposed to what I'd always done, which was just learning languages for the fun of it. Learning to communicate with people, learning about foreign cultures. And on a bigger level, it cheapened what it meant to speak a language or to know a language. Now, if I can impart you with anything today at TEDx Teen, it's that knowing a language is a lot more than knowing a couple words out of a dictionary. It's a lot more than being able to ask someone where the bathroom is or telling them the time of day. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So for those of you who aren't familiar with my story, maybe a lot of you here don't know what the word polyglot is, and it's a pretty weird one. I started here. So this little tot is me, circa 2001, and this is the beginning of my language learning journey. I actually was a child actor before I learned any languages. And I always had a little bit of a gift for accents. So I would go into auditions for radio commercials or for TV commercials, and I would do an Austin Powers impression. I'm not going to do one now. Or maybe I would do Apu from The Simpsons. In fact, there was actually one time in an audition in which I was asked to leave because they told me to speak like a little kid with a lisp, and I wanted to do Darth Vader in a French accent. But that taught me the basics of how to break down sound, how to pick up a foreign accent or foreign speech patterns, and really live with it. Now, fast forward a little bit. I'm now in about 3rd grade, and I've just started French for the first time. But 6 months into it, a year into it, even 2 years later, I can't converse with anybody. French is just another subject in school, and even though I can tell you words for elbow, knee bone, shoelace, I couldn't really have a fluent conversation with anybody. Fast forward a little bit more. In 7th grade, I started Latin. So Latin, of course, is a dead language, and in learning Latin, you really learn how to break down language, to see language as a system with rules and as a bit of a puzzle. So that was great, but I still didn't feel like language was for me. So forward a little bit more. I'm about 13, and out of an interest in learning more about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I started studying Hebrew. Now, I had no way of doing it. I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing. So I listened to a lot of rap music. I'd memorize lyrics, I'd spit them back out, and I would just try to chat with native speakers once a week, once a month. And I found that incrementally, I started to understand a lot more. Now, I didn't sound like a native speaker. I couldn't speak very articulately, and I certainly didn't know the grammar, but I had done what I had never managed to do in school, which was to pick up the basics of a language all on my own. Forward a little bit more. I started taking Arabic when I was 14 in a summer program going into 9th grade. This was summer of 2010. After a month, I found that I could read and write without a problem. I learned the basics of the formal language and one of its major dialects. And it turned me on to the fact that I really could pursue languages as a hobby. So it finally came to March 24th, 2011. So I have pretty vicious insomnia, and as I was studying more languages, using grammar books or watching TV shows in, let's say, Arabic or Hebrew became one way of focusing my time. So on that night, while I was awake till some ungodly hour, I recorded myself speaking Arabic into my computer screen, subtitled it, and I uploaded it to YouTube under the title, Tim Speaks Arabic. Tim يتكلم اللغة العربية. Next day, I did the same thing. Tim מדבר עברית. Tim speaks Hebrew. And the comments, when they trickled in, were fantastic. I got things like, wow, I've never seen an American speak Arabic before. Can you blame them? In addition to that, I got things like, wow, maybe you should fix your vowels here. Or maybe this word is pronounced this way. So suddenly, language learning had gone from the solitary pages of a book or my computer screen into the wide world. After that, I was hooked. I had a community of speakers to interact with, and I essentially had a teacher or conversational partners for any language that I wanted to do. So I'll show you a quick montage of that.
بدأت دراسة اللغة العربية منذ حوالي نصف سنة. Ini mulai 1, 2, 3, 4. Kira-kira 4 hari lalu. אני מרגיש שזה יותר קל לקרוא ולכתוב בערבית.
كجت نizani gendon o jiboe mawin.
Lakini juzi nilirudi nyumbani, nilikuwa nikijifunza Kifarsi.
زما تلفظ څنګه دی؟ ډېره مننه. ورځ ده په خیر. د خدای په امان.
That became my way of reaching out to the world. But as I was learning all these languages, I faced a number of obstacles. So number one, I had no idea how to teach myself. In fact, I'm sure many of you, if you were told you have to learn Pashto by next month, you wouldn't know what to do. So I experimented. Here's one thing. So in my Latin class, I read about something that Cicero described called method of loci, or technically loquorum. But it's a technique in which you take mnemonics. So let's say you want to learn 10 vocab words on a list. You take each of those words, and instead of memorizing them in blocks, you integrate them into your spatial memory. So here's what I mean. This spot right here is Union Square. It's a place I go every day. If I close my eyes, I can imagine it very, very vividly. So I imagine myself walking down Union Square, and at each spot in my mind that has resonance, I associate it with a vocab word. I'll show you right now. I'm walking down Park Avenue, and in Japanese to walk is iku. I go a little bit further, turn right, sit on the steps where I can suwaru. Directly north of there is a statue of George Washington, which I used to think was a fountain, so that's nomu, to drink. Right next to that is a tree that you can kiru, cut. If you want to go north through a Barnes & Noble, you can yomu, to read. Or if I'm hungry and I want to go to my favorite falafel place, I can go 1 block west of there, so I can taberu, to eat. Did I miss one? All right, so 8 out of 10. Not bad. So I found that most of the time, by experimenting with methods like these, it made language learning a much more interactive experience. It made it something that I could remember much better and I had a lot of fun with. Maybe that's not for you. Here's another one. So a lot of people often ask me, if you're studying so many languages at the same time, how do you not confuse them? Or how do you learn so many vocab words? In Spanish, I learn the word for table, and then the word for book goes out the other ear. What I do is embrace those. So for example, take these 3 words in Indonesian. These were actually among the first 50 words that I learned. Kepala, kabar, kantor. Lexically, they're unrelated to each other. Kepala is a head, kabar is news, kantor is an office. But they all sound similar, K-A, right? So what I would do is I would memorize vocab in batches of sounds that were similar. So if I hear the word kepala in Indonesian, I automatically think the words kabar and kantor. Same in Arabic, iqtisad, istiqlal, suqut. Those 3 words are unrelated. One is economy, one is independence, one is downfall. But if I hear one, it triggers it triggers the rest. Same thing in Hebrew, chozel, zochel, zolech, even though those are return, remember, and to shine. Or in Farsi, in which they are related. So for me, if I hear the word pedar, which means father, I automatically think of the words modar, barodar, dochtar, mother, brother, daughter. So again, this is one method, and I'm not saying this will make you fluent in a language, but it has been one of my ways of overcoming those obstacles.
We could go on and watch the last 4 minutes, but this gives you a big picture overview, right? Language is a beautiful thing, and we're going to talk about language in terms of international business, international negotiation, and the fact that language influences culture and vice versa. So let me share chapter 5, and we will come on. Chapter 5, language. So in intercultural business communication, language is probably one of the biggest challenges we're going to face, because if we don't speak the language of the host country, how is that communication going to take place? Language is what holds a group of people together, the commonality of a language. So it controls the way we shape concepts, how we think, how we perceive, how we judge others. Language reveals what our social class is, it based on accents and phrasing and word usage, and slang, colloquialisms, acronyms, euphemisms, jargon also reveal a lot about us. In that context, there are languages that are high context and languages that are low context. So a high context language relies a lot on nonverbals. So the verbal language and the nonverbal go hand in hand to create the full picture of that conversation. And countries in Latin America, Arab countries, Chinese and Koreans are very high context languages. Low context languages, language is explicit. We say what we mean what we say. Very American concept. German, Scandinavians, Swiss also are that low context where your body language has very little to do with the message that you're explaining. Other aspects of language, some languages are linear, others are nonlinear. So a linear language, it's logical and time continuum. It's this logical straight line communication. So the US linear language results in very short-term planning, because we want to ensure results and we want to see the results right away. And we're very structured and logical. And so it ends up shortening our time frame. Nonlinear languages are more circular, they're more tradition oriented, they're subjective, and it's more about the context and the stories that are told and the traditions that are practiced. And in Chinese culture, for example, one of the results of this is a long-range planning philosophy. Parables and proverbs that are told in certain languages and cultures also form the structure and the framework of a language. So I wanted to give some examples. Find the right place here. Okay, so a proverb in the US, waste not, want not. What does that mean? Okay, it's this very structured, you don't waste, you'll have what you need, you want, go for what you want, etc. The early bird gets the worm. Okay, again, a proverb that indicates that we prefer and we have a bias towards people who are on time. A German proverb, he who is afraid of doing too much always does too little. Okay, now what does that speak to you? Very much that German drive, you're going to work, you're going to do everything, you're going to work really hard and accomplish a lot. A Japanese proverb, silence is golden. Americans are like, what? Silence? No, you know. For the Japanese, that calm serenity, pausing before you speak, very important. Another aspect is, how do you write numbers? Is it with a point? Is it with a comma? And there can be a lot of misunderstanding just simply about how we write numbers, right? And then the structures of our languages are different as well. Forms of verbal interaction. So in the US, we very much believe in this verbal dueling. In other words, we gain dominance through debate, who can win, etc. This can be very offensive in another language. Then we've got the repartee conversation. So shared short conversation that goes back and forth. So in the US, we almost like talk over each other and go back and forth. Whereas in Arab and African countries, they are long monologues where people sit there and nod and very quietly and patiently listen. And then someone else gets their turn and they deliver their long monologue, and it can go back and forth for seemingly hours. Then there's ritual conversations, so standard replies and comments. So in the US, We have casual, uninvolved pleasantries. Arabs invoke Allah, Allah's goodwill, and they avoid personal situations. And then Latin Americans discuss health and family at length. Self-disclosure, telling others about yourself. In the US, we talk about business is business and you leave out personal stuff. In high context cultures, you discuss personal and family situations at length, and you disclose a lot about yourself. Okay. We also need to know what are the conversational taboos in other countries. So for example, in Austria, it is appropriate to talk about professions, cars, skiing, and music, but you do not talk about money, religion, divorce, or separation. In France, you may talk about music, books, sports, and theater. This is like the conversational chit chat, getting to know each other, etc. Topics to avoid: prices of items, the person's work, their income, their age. And you can go through this list. I would suggest that on your website you have some conversational taboos, topics that are appropriate or not appropriate in the culture that you're studying. And then I wanted to give you some illustrations of how business has struggled with translations in ad campaigns and other situations. So HSBC Bank was forced to rebrand their entire global private banking operations after they brought their US campaign overseas. So in 2009, they spent millions of dollars to scrap their 5-year-old Assume Nothing campaign. Because overseas in many countries, that assume nothing got translated or understood as do nothing. In the end, the bank spent another $10 million to change its tagline to the world's private bank, which is a much friendlier translation. KFC, when they opened in China in the late 80s, their finger licking good got translated accidentally as eat your fingers off. There was a lot of criticism about that. There was a lot of shock and disappointment, and yet they are the #1 quick service restaurant brand in China with more than 4,400 restaurants. So that campaign mistake was overcome with a new campaign. Electrolux. Electrolux is a Swedish vacuum maker, and they came to the US and ran a campaign tagline that said, "Nothing sucks like an Electrolux." So suck and lux, they were wanting that rhyming, but they did not understand the slogan, the slang in America about something sucking. So the Electrolux vacuum cleaner struggled to take off in the US because of that. Ford launched an ad campaign in European country that they wanted to talk about the car's excellent manufacturing, with the thought said, every car has a high quality body. And it got translated, every car has a high quality corpse. You can see the problem with that. Braniff Airlines in '87 ran a campaign in Mexico. The US campaign was fly in leather, the seats were leather, but it got translated vuela en cuero, or fly naked, far from the message that was intended. American Motors launched a new mid-size car called the Matador in early 1970s in Puerto Rico, but it translated into killer, a hazardous car that could kill you. Pampers. Pampers in the US has run this image of a baby being flown in with a stork, and that was not something that translated into Japanese. They figured people were confused with that stork. What is the stork? What story is this? Because it was not part of Japanese folklore. So the story goes in Japanese folklore that giant floating peaches bring babies to their parents. And so a much better imagery for Pampers would be peaches bringing in a baby. So there you go. Language, the importance of language and understanding. And may I say, making an effort to speak the other person's language goes a long ways. The simple wanting to learn a few things. Take the inspiration from the young man on TEDx Teens who has learned so many languages. People are so willing to help you if you make that effort. And may I suggest that if time permits, you learn a few things ahead of time from native speakers, and you stay away from words that could be confusing or that could be misinterpreted if you say it wrong, but rely on the knowledge of a native speaker to educate you on the few things that will be advantageous for you to know, so that your hosts understand that you are gracious in making an effort.